I thought my baby shower would be the happiest day of my life. Instead, it became the moment I realized my entire marriage was a lie. What they didn't know, I came prepared. My in-laws threw me a baby shower, or so I thought. As I stepped into the grand hall, expecting laughter and balloons, my heart dropped. A giant red banner screamed, "Farewell Party," across the room. My eyes shifted to a table nearby. On it sat a neatly packed suitcase and divorce papers, already signed by my husband. Standing next to them, with eyes colder than winter, he said in a voice that barely sounded human, "Your job's done. Leave." The words sliced through me, sharp and final, but instead of crumbling, I smiled, a calm, knowing smile, and whispered, "Then let's begin the real farewell party." That was the exact moment their nightmare began. The illusion of a fairy tale beginning. Nestled deep in the heart of the Midwest, the town of Rosefield looked like something out of a postcard. Brick buildings lined Main Street, passed down through generations, each with a story, a legacy. Behind them stretched peaceful, manicured neighborhoods, wide lawns, white fences, the picture of American perfection. And at the center of this dreamy little town stood a church with a towering spire, the kind every girl in Rosefield dreamed of getting married in. For 27-year-old Lena Hart, that dream once felt real. She had met Ethan Marshall during the town's annual Arts and Culture Festival. Lena, fresh out of art school, was volunteering, helping children paint murals. Ethan, the polished son of a powerful local real estate mogul, was there for his family's promotional campaign. He was the kind of man who made you forget to breathe, confident but kind. Ambitious yet humble, or so she believed. Weekends turned into dates, laughs turned into kisses, and when he proposed under a canopy of fairy lights, Lena didn't hesitate. "I know my family can be traditional," Ethan said that night, slipping the ring on her finger. "But once they get to know you, they'll love you." But tradition was a soft word for something far colder. Behind the mansion doors, Lena's first visit to the Marshall estate felt like walking into another world. The mansion loomed on a hill just outside Rosefield, a 3-story Victorian fortress with turrets, arched windows, and wrought iron gates that creaked like a warning. Inside, everything was ornate, frozen in time. Chandeliers sparkled, oil portraits stared down, and not one thing felt warm. She nervously smoothed her dress, hands trembling. At the grand entrance stood Harold Marshall, Ethan's father, a man carved from stone, with eyes that scanned her like she was a bargain he wasn't sure about. "So," he said during dinner, slicing his steak without looking up, "you teach art?" Lena forced a smile. "Yes, I work with kids. Not much of a living." "Is it?" Harold cut in, already moving on. Across the long table, Vivian, Ethan's mother, let out a slow, theatrical sigh, dressed in pearls and a carefully chosen air of superiority. She turned to her son. "Ethan, you're the heir to this house. Don't forget that. With legacy comes responsibility." Her words were dipped in sugar but sharpened like knives. Lena tried to stay composed, but the message was clear: she didn't belong here. Ethan's uncle, Gerald, and his aloof wife Marissa didn't say much. They didn't need to. Their glances said enough. Polished, powerful, dismissive. Marissa came from a high-profile family in Rosefield. She had the kind of presence that made other women shrink, and she clearly enjoyed watching Lena squirm. And then, after dessert, Vivian said it. "In our family, it's tradition to have children shortly after marriage," she said, eyes on Lena's wedding ring. "Especially for the wife of the eldest son. A male heir ensures the future." The room was silent, cold, expectant. That night, as Ethan held her hand in the car, Lena stared out the window and felt something she hadn't felt before: doubt. Not about him, not yet, but about the world she was stepping into. The weight of expectations. The first few months of marriage were a blur for Lena. She tried her best to blend into the Marshall family's cold rhythm, teaching art to kids in a cozy little studio on Main Street, smiling through Sunday dinners, nodding through conversations where her voice barely mattered. But every night, when she lay awake beside Ethan's sleeping form, the silence pressed down harder. Her mother-in-law's constant question became a ritual. "Not yet?" Every time the answer was no, Lena felt smaller. A year passed, then another, and with it came the whispering. Lena started visiting a fertility clinic. Quietly, alone. Hormone shots bruised her arms. Failed treatments bruised her spirit. Still, she pressed on, enduring the stinging looks, the pity disguised as politeness. "There's nothing wrong with my son," Vivian would say at charity events, her voice perfectly modulated for the public. Marshall men are known for strong bloodlines. And Marissa, always with her perfect children in tow, made sure Lena never forgot her failure. "Oh, motherhood changes you," she'd coo loudly, tossing her hair. But I guess you wouldn't understand. Ethan? He barely noticed. He buried himself in work. Leaving early. Coming home late. Lena's pain became invisible to him. Just another chore. Another thing he didn't have time for. And when she finally broke down one night, tears falling as she held yet another negative test, Ethan simply muttered, "It's just not happening yet. Maybe next month." No comfort, no effort, just detachment. By the end of their second year, Lena felt like a ghost living inside someone else's life. A shell of the hopeful woman who once dreamed of painting nurseries and late-night lullabies. But deep inside, something began to shift, not despair, but defiance. She wasn't going to stay silent forever. A baby, but not the joy. In the dead of winter, as snow blanketed the streets of Rosefield, Lena sat in a tiny clinic room clutching a phone with shaking hands. Pregnant. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not of sadness, but relief. After years of whispers, pain, and isolation, there was life inside her. She called Ethan immediately. His voice on the other end? Flat. "That's good. I'll let my father know." No joy, no warmth, just duty. Passed up the chain. At dinner that night, the Marshall family finally gave Lena something she had almost forgotten existed, a smile. At last, Harold declared, raising his glass of champagne. "We have an heir." Vivian chimed in with a faint, disinterested, "Let's pray it's a boy." Lena stared down at her plate. No one asked how she was feeling. No one noticed her trembling hand. They weren't celebrating her, just what she could give them. And even then, they didn't trust her. Vivian began sending a housekeeper 3 times a week. "Since you probably can't handle cooking anymore," she said with a practiced smile. Marissa offered advice with a venomous twist. "Pregnancy weight sticks. Be careful." Even Ethan became more distant, coming home later, answering with nods or one-word replies. The rare times Lena said she wasn't feeling well, he'd brush it off. Having a boy is just that demanding. But at 6 months, during a routine checkup, Lena sat quietly as the doctor said words that turned her world upside down again. "It's a girl." Joy and fear collided in her chest. She was carrying a daughter, a child she already loved deeply, but she knew what that meant in the Marshall household. That night, when she told Ethan, he hesitated, just for a second. "We'll try for a boy next time," he said. Dinner with the family was a frozen storm. Harold grunted. Vivian pursed her lips. Marissa and Gerald exchanged a glance that felt like a verdict. From that moment on, they treated her pregnancy not as a blessing, but as a disappointment. And Lena? She began counting the days. Not to her due date, but to her exit plan. The first crack in the mask. As her belly grew, Lena felt herself shrink inside the Marshall home. Ethan's business trips became more frequent. The man who once held her hand under the stars now barely looked her in the eye. And at night, he stopped sleeping in their bed altogether, claiming he needed better rest on the guest room mattress. Lena stopped asking why, but then, one night, she accidentally picked up Ethan's phone. Thinking it was hers, a message blinked on the screen. "Can we meet tonight?" From a woman, someone she didn't know. Her heart didn't break, not then. It cracked slowly, silently. She placed the phone down like it had burned her and stood there in the dark. One hand on her belly, the other clenched into a quiet fist. That night, Lena made a decision. She pulled out a small notebook, one she had bought months earlier but never used. And she began to write. Every word her in-law said. Every strange change in Ethan's schedule. Every cruel look. Every fake smile. Day after day, she recorded everything, like a soldier mapping enemy lines. This wasn't just pain anymore. It was evidence. And then, 2 months before her due date, her phone rang. "We're throwing you a baby shower," Vivian said, her voice unnaturally warm. 2 weeks from now, everything's being arranged. Lena blinked in surprise. "Thank you, Mother," she replied softly. "I'm looking forward to it." And for the first time in months, hope flickered. Maybe, just maybe, they were coming around. After the call, she sat by the window, watching the snow melt in the morning sun. She placed both hands on her stomach and whispered, "We're almost there, just a little longer, you and me." The shower that wasn't. 2 weeks before her due date, Lena stood in front of the mirror, gently adjusting her pale blue maternity dress. It was the first time in a long time she'd allowed herself to feel hope. The invitation had come in elegant script. "Let's celebrate a new member of the family," and it had even been signed by Vivian herself. For once, she'd called Lena directly, not through a maid or a distant message. Maybe this was it. Maybe they were finally ready to welcome her, to accept her daughter. Carefully, she descended the stairs, holding the banister with one hand, her other hand resting on her belly. Outside, a taxi waited at the gate. Ethan had left that morning, saying he was going ahead to help with preparations. When she climbed into the car, the driver glanced back and smiled. "Big day?" Lena smiled softly. "Yes, it's my first baby. A little girl." "Congratulations," he said warmly. "Girls are the best." As the car pulled into the circular driveway of the Rosefield Country Club, Lena's heart beat faster. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and held the invitation in her hand, reading the words again, just to reassure herself. Lena Hart's baby shower. At the entrance, a staff member greeted her with a polite nod. "Mrs. Marshall, we've been expecting you. This way, please." She followed him through the main hall, her heels echoing softly on the marble floor. At the end of the corridor stood tall double doors. Behind them, the celebration. Or so she believed. The doors swung open. For a moment, the light blinded her, and then her breath caught. There were no balloons, no pastel decorations, no laughter, no baby games. Instead, a giant red banner hung from the ceiling. "Farewell party." The room fell silent. Lena blinked, unsure if she was dreaming. But it was real. Every pair of eyes in the room watching her. Judging her. Waiting. On a table near the center sat three things. A signed divorce packet, a stack of sealed documents, and her suitcase. Standing beside them, Ethan, and next to him, a woman she didn't recognize. Confident, poised, younger. Lena froze. Vivian stepped forward, arms folded. "So glad you could join us," she said, her voice sharp and hollow. Ethan's eyes were cold, distant, a stranger's. "Lena," he said flatly, "meet Harper. She and I, we're together now. You've served your purpose." Lena's knees nearly gave out. Her heart thundered in her chest. "Your job is done," Ethan continued. "Once the child is born, she'll stay with us. You're free to leave." Harper gave a smug smile. "I've heard so much about you," she said, like Lena was some character in a story long finished. Then Harold stepped forward and pointed to the paperwork. "Everything's arranged. Just sign." Lena's eyes moved slowly across the room, the family, the guests, the whispers. No one spoke for her. No one objected. Not a single hand reached out. This was supposed to be a baby shower. Lena whispered, barely able to form the words. Vivian gave a cruel smile. "You were just the vessel. You don't belong in this family. You never did." The ache in Lena's chest turned into something else. Not pain, not shock, but fury. She took a slow, deep breath, and inside her, something powerful awakened. The real party begins. Lena's hands trembled as she reached into her purse, not out of fear, but purpose. She pulled out her phone, thumb hovering over the screen. For a moment, she closed her eyes. 3 years of humiliation, of silence, of gathering receipts while they underestimated her. It all led to this. Then, she pressed a button. A giant screen behind the banquet table flickered to life. Gasps echoed through the room as the first video played. Ethan, Harper, in Lena's bedroom, intimate, laughing, together. The timestamp? 6 months ago. Ethan's face went pale. Harper's smirk disappeared. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Lena's voice, calm and razor-sharp, cut through the noise. "That's just the appetizer." She tapped her screen again. Now it was Harold on the screen, speaking with a junior employee behind closed doors. Discussing forged signatures, inflated property values, and off-the-record land deals. Crystal clear audio, crystal clear guilt. Lena turned to him slowly. "Oops," she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Looks like the town's watching now." More whispers. Faces turned. Several guests stepped back, as if the dirt might splash onto them. Lena stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "This isn't a farewell party for me." She pointed around the room. "It's yours." And just then, as if perfectly timed, the main entrance swung open. A man in a tailored suit walked in. "My attorney," Lena said with a nod. Then the side door opened, and a group of women walked in behind him, each one with steely eyes and set jaws. "These are victims," Lena explained, turning to the crowd. "Cheated and deceived by Marshall Real Estate. They've come to witness what justice looks like." Ethan reached forward, trying to grab her phone. But Lena stepped back without flinching. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice calm but dangerous. "This is all being recorded." In fact, she turned her phone around, showing the screen, a live stream in progress. Over 300 viewers watching as it all unfolded. Then she played one more clip. Vivian's voice, unmistakable. "She's just a tool. Once she gives us a child, we'll dispose of her." The crowd shifted. Some people audibly gasped. Others began filming. Lena's eyes scanned the room as she lifted her chin. "For 3 years, I documented everything. Every word, every action, every lie." She tapped her phone once more. Now came medical records, DNA reports, fertility assessments. "Ethan," she said, locking eyes with her husband. You told your family I was the reason we couldn't conceive." She held up a document. "But according to this, the issue was never me." The room went dead silent. "You have a severe sperm formation disorder." Harper recoiled. Ethan looked stunned. Vivian looked like the floor had dropped beneath her. Lena gently placed her hand on her stomach. "This baby," she said, her voice like steel wrapped in velvet, "was conceived with a donor. Through proper medical procedures." She paused. "So no, she's not yours. Not biologically. And that makes her the luckiest child in this room." The back doors burst open again. 2 officers entered, badges flashing. Lena nodded toward Harold. "There's someone here who needs to answer some questions about tax evasion and fraud." Journalists began flooding in behind them, snapping photos, taking video. The story was already spilling onto the internet, wildfire. Lena picked up the divorce papers from the table and looked at Ethan one last time. "You wanted me gone?" She reached into her bag and pulled out her own set of documents. "Then we do this on my terms." Her lawyer stepped beside her, spreading out her demands: fair asset distribution, sole custody, public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Ethan lunged forward again, grabbing her arm. Lena didn't flinch. "The violence is being streamed too," she said, her voice ice cold. "You want to keep going?" The guests, once silent witnesses, now looked at her with something new in their eyes: respect, awe, and something the marshals had never given her: belief. Walking out, standing tall, the air in the hall had changed. The whispers were no longer about her failure, but about her courage. The Marshall name, once untouchable in Rosefield, now hung in the air like smoke from a fire everyone could finally see. Harold slumped into a chair, his face ghost pale. Vivian stared at the floor, her hands trembling. Ethan looked like a man trying to wake up from a nightmare he created himself. And Lena? She was still standing. She walked over to the table, slowly, deliberately, picked up the divorce papers, and signed her name in smooth, confident strokes. Then she nodded toward her lawyer, who stepped forward with a second set of documents. "These are my terms," Lena said, her voice echoing through the silent room. 40% of Marshall Real Estate's assets, sole custody, and a formal investigation into your illegal business practices. No one dared speak. Ethan, in a final desperate move, reached out again. "Lena." She shook off his hand with quiet precision. "Don't. Whatever this was, it's over." He tried again. "Who do you think you are?" Lena didn't even blink. "I'm the woman you underestimated. The one you tried to erase." She turned to the guests, lifting her head high. "To all of you who watched this family rule this town without question, those days are over. Today is not my farewell party, it's yours." Vivian finally rose from her chair, her voice cracking with fury. "Get out. You're a disgrace to this family." Lena turned to her with a calm smile. "I'm leaving, Vivian, but not because I'm ashamed. You see," she placed her hand over her heart, "I have something none of you ever did. Integrity. And courage." Then she turned toward the exit. As she walked past the stunned crowd, the camera is still rolling. Not a single marshal moved to stop her. At the doorway, she paused. She turned her head slightly, just enough to lock eyes with Ethan and Harper one last time. "You two deserve each other." Her voice was steady, cold. "I hope you find happiness, deceiving each other." And with that, Lena Hart, no longer a marshal, walked out of the mansion with nothing but her truth, and her unborn child. Outside, a car waited. Her best friend Maya sat behind the wheel, eyes wide with worry. "Did it work?" she asked. Lena opened the door, climbed into the passenger seat, and took a long breath, the kind of breath you take when a storm passes and the sun finally breaks through. "Perfectly," she said. "Their nightmare has just begun." The car rolled away from the grand estate, down the tree-lined streets of Rosefield, the town that once tried to bury her. Lena didn't look back. She wasn't leaving in shame. She was rising. A new life. A new name. 3 weeks later, in a sunlit hospital room just outside Rosefield, Lena held her daughter for the first time. 10 tiny fingers. Bright, curious eyes. A cry that filled the room with life. She named her Sophie, a name that meant wisdom. The nurses said she was beautiful. The doctor said she was strong. But to Lena, Sophie was something deeper than that. She was proof. Proof that Lena had survived. Word spread quickly. The once whispered name of Lena Hart now filled front pages. The Rosefield Gazette printed a photo of mother and child beneath a bold headline. A new life, and the fight for justice. Her story had caught fire. The town that once turned its back was beginning to turn its head. People started asking questions. People started taking sides. In a quiet office on the outskirts of Rosefield, Lena sat across from her attorney, Judith Carver, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who radiated calm power. She had been Lena's shield and sword through every legal battle, and she wasn't done yet. Sophie rested in Lena's arms. Asleep. Judith looked over stacks of paperwork. The marshals are fighting back. They're trying to get the evidence thrown out, claiming invasion of privacy. Lena nodded slowly. Expected. But we've got them boxed in. Judith continued. The recordings were made in public or semi-public spaces, including their own offices. And the footage of Harold's crimes? Protected under whistleblower laws. Lena met Judith's eyes. I didn't come this far to be silenced again. Just then, Judith's assistant stepped in with a court notice. She handed it to Judith, who scanned the lines with raised eyebrows. The judge has ordered full financial disclosure of Marshall Real Estate's books. She looked up, smiling. It's happening. Lena glanced down at Sophie, who stirred softly in her arms. Good, she whispered. Because this time, it's not just for me. The courtroom stage. 3 months after the baby shower that wasn't. The people of Rosefield packed into the county courthouse. Lines wrapped around the building. News crews hovered. The town was divided, old money versus new truth. On one side, the loyalists, those who had benefited from the Marshall name, afraid of change. On the other, the reformers, people who had been overlooked, mistreated, silenced, people who saw in Lena something they hadn't seen before. A woman who fought back. Inside the courtroom, Lena sat quietly in the front row, dressed in a navy blue suit. Beside her was Judith. Behind her, the women Marshall Real Estate had once bulldozed, tenants forced out. Buyers misled, families crushed under empty promises. They wore pins on their jackets with a single word. Truth. Sophie, now 6 months old, stayed with Maya outside. Lena kissed her forehead that morning and whispered, "Today, Mommy speaks for both of us." When the judge called her name, she stood. The courtroom hushed. She walked to the witness stand, placed her hand on the Bible, and sat down. Judith rose. "Ms. Hart, can you tell us what life was like as a member of the Marshall family?" Lena took a breath, her voice calm and even. "For 3 years, I lived under their roof. I was told I wasn't enough. Not good enough. Not useful enough. Not Marshall enough. I was used as a tool to bear a child. And when they thought I had outlived my usefulness, they planned to discard me." The room was so quiet. You could hear the pen scribbling. "They didn't just try to end my marriage," she said, looking directly at the judge. "They tried to erase me." She spoke of Vivian's words, Harold's threats, Marissa's coldness, Ethan's betrayal. But she never raised her voice. She didn't cry. She simply spoke truth, and it hit harder than any scream. When she finished, the Marshall family's attorney stood to cross-examine. He tried to rattle her, tried to twist her words, tried to paint her as vindictive. But Lena didn't flinch. "The facts don't change," she said. "I didn't destroy the Marshall legacy. They did, the moment they decided to abuse their power." The judge didn't say a word, but his eyes followed Lena closely. And they didn't look away. That day, Lena walked out of court with her head high. Outside, a small group of supporters had gathered. Some clapped, others just nodded. But one woman stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "They did the same to my sister," she whispered, but no one believed her. Lena gently squeezed her hand. "They will now." The confession. The courtroom was packed when Ethan Marshall was called to the stand. He looked nothing like the man Lena had married. The designer suits and easy charm were gone. His face was pale, drawn, his eyes hollow. Harper wasn't in the gallery. She had vanished the moment the scandal broke. Just like the rest of them. Ethan sat down, placed his hand on the Bible, and didn't look at Lena once. The prosecutor stood. "Mr. Marshall, you deceived your wife. You misled her, humiliated her, and tried to strip her of her child. Why?" Ethan didn't answer right away. The silence stretched. Finally, he spoke. "Because I was told to." A murmur passed through the gallery. "Told by whom?" the prosecutor pressed. Ethan glanced toward the front row where Harold sat, silent, stone-faced. "By my father," Ethan said. "Everything, the baby, the shower, the divorce, was planned. He said it was the way things had always been done. That a Marshall heir needed a proper mother. Someone chosen." He looked down, ashamed. I believed him. Vivian buried her face in her hands. Harold didn't move. "Did you ever love your wife?" Ethan swallowed, looked up. For the first time, his eyes met Lena's. "Yes," he said quietly. At first, Lena didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She just looked at him, not as a woman pleading for closure, but as someone who had already let go. When the prosecutor sat down, Judith stood for redirect. "Mr. Marshall," she asked gently, "what broke that love?" Ethan exhaled. "The pressure, the expectations. I didn't know how to fight them." Judith nodded once. "So you chose to betray instead?" No answer. and none was needed. When he stepped down from the stand, Ethan walked past Lena, slower than before, humbled, and as he passed, he whispered, "I'm sorry." Lena didn't speak, she didn't nod, she didn't smile, but deep in her eyes, there was peace. Because forgiveness doesn't always mean returning. Sometimes, it just means you're done carrying the weight. The verdict. 6 months after the first gavel struck, Lena returned to court one final time, this time, with Sophie in her arms. The baby nestled against her chest, dressed in a pale yellow dress, wide-eyed and curious. Her presence in the courtroom wasn't planned. It was purposeful. Because this wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about the world Sophie would grow up in. When Lena was called forward, she stood tall, dressed in white, the color of peace, not surrender. The judge looked over the courtroom. Every seat was filled. The town of Rosefield had come to see how this chapter would close. He cleared his throat. In the matter of Lena Hart versus Ethan Marshall and Marshall Real Estate. The entire room held its breath. This court awards Ms. Hart full legal custody of her child, Sophie Hart. The court also grants her 40% ownership of Marshall Real Estate Holdings. Based on financial misconduct and marital deception. A ripple of shock moved through the room. The judge continued, his voice firm. Furthermore, this court refers the Marshall family for federal investigation based on evidence presented, including fraud, tax evasion, and corporate malpractice. Lena didn't react immediately. She just held Sophie a little tighter. Judith leaned over and whispered, "It's done. You won." But it didn't feel like a win. It felt like release. As they walked out of the courthouse, reporters crowded the steps. People clapped. Some even cried. Maya was waiting with open arms. And then, a voice called out, "Lena." She turned. Ethan stood alone, several steps behind, his parents nowhere in sight. He looked different, not just tired, but emptied. "Can you forgive me?" he asked softly. She looked at him for a long moment, then said with gentle resolve, "Forgiveness and forgetting are not the same." Her voice was steady, clear. "I forgive you, but we're never going back." She turned, Sophie still resting against her heart, and walked into the bright afternoon sun. A new beginning. 5 years later, Rosefield looked different. The power that once clung to the Marshall name had faded, replaced by something brighter, more honest. And standing at the heart of that transformation was Lena Hart, now CEO of a company reborn under a new name. New Hope Development. The old Marshall mansion had been gutted and rebuilt. Half of it now served as the company's headquarters. The other half converted into a support center for single mothers and their children. Lena arrived early that morning, holding Sophie's small hand. The girl, now 5, skipped happily alongside her, a bouquet of wildflowers clutched in her arm. "Look, Mommy, for your desk." Lena smiled, heart full. "It's beautiful, just like you." They stepped inside. Janet at the front desk waved cheerfully. "Morning, Ms. Hart. Don't forget, the community garden ceremony is at 2. Wouldn't miss it," Lena said with a nod. She dropped Sophie off at the in-house childcare room, a space filled with art, books, and laughter, then headed to her office. From the window, she could see the field that once held the country club where her life had fallen apart. It had been leveled, transformed into a public park, open to all. Kids played there now. Families gathered. Lena sipped her coffee, letting the view settle deep into her bones. She had turned pain into purpose. Judith arrived just before lunch, carrying a folder and a wide grin. "The state legislature passed it," she said, breathless with excitement. Lena stood, stunned. "The single mother support bill? Passed unanimously." They embraced, a long, silent hug that said more than words ever could. That afternoon, Lena stood before a crowd at the opening of the community garden. Reporters filmed. Children tugged at parents' hands. Volunteers wore shirts that read, "Planted in truth, grown in hope." Lena took the mic. 5 years ago, I stood in a room where I was told I was worthless. That my only value was what I could give, and once I had given it, I was to be discarded. She paused. "But here's the thing about people like us, we don't break. We bend, we grow, and we rise." The crowd clapped. Some wiped away tears. "This garden isn't just about flowers," Lena continued. "It's about resilience, about second chances, and it's about building the kind of world we want our children to grow up in. One where compassion is strength, not weakness." Later, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and pink, Lena spotted a familiar figure near the edge of the crowd. Ethan. He looked older, thinner, but something in his face had changed. No bitterness, no bravado, just quiet acceptance. Their eyes met. He gave a small nod. Lena returned it, and then she turned away, not in anger, but in peace. Some stories don't need revenge. They just need closure. The legacy she chose. The morning light poured into Lena's home, a modest, eco-friendly house nestled within the newly built Willow Rise community. A neighborhood created on the very land the old Marshalls once tried to seize illegally. Sophie ran through the garden barefoot, her curls bouncing, laughter echoing in the warm spring air. She was 5 now, bright, bold, full of joy. And Lena? She watched from the porch, coffee in hand, eyes soft with peace, no longer carrying pain, just memories. Mommy, look. Sophie held up another bouquet of wildflowers, her morning ritual. This one's for your office. Lena smiled. I'll put it right next to yesterday's. Inside, the walls were lined with children's art, framed photos of community events. A small plaque near the front door read, "Founded in strength, led by truth." The company, New Hope Development, had grown into something bigger than Lena ever imagined. It prioritized transparency, affordable housing, environmental responsibility, and most of all, people. Every employee was treated with respect, especially the women who once thought no one would ever hear their voices. One wing of the company building had been transformed into a women's resource center, complete with free childcare, job training programs, and legal aid. It wasn't just business anymore. It was a movement, one that started the moment Lena refused to sign those divorce papers quietly. Judith, now a close friend and mentor, visited often, and Maya, still by her side, managed the foundation they had started together. Sometimes, people still whispered about the scandal, about the fall of the Marshalls. But Lena no longer cared. Because this wasn't about their fall. It was about her rise. That evening, as they sat under a sky freckled with stars, Sophie curled up in Lena's lap, looking up at her with curious eyes. "Mommy," she asked, "what do you do?" Lena smiled, kissed the top of her head, and replied softly, "I build homes, sweetheart. But more than that, I help people believe they belong." Sophie blinked, thoughtful. "Like you and me?" Lena nodded. "Exactly like us." And in that moment, beneath the stars, Lena realized something. The life she had now, the peace, the purpose, the daughter she adored. It was never the plan the world had for her. It was the one she built with her own 2 hands. The one she chose. After the storm, the seasons turned. Rosefield began to change, slowly at first. Then all at once, the name Marshall faded from buildings, from contracts, from power. And in its place, a new symbol began to rise, one that stood not for dominance, but for dignity. New Hope Development partnered with local schools to offer free art classes. The old downtown library, once defunded, had been renovated and renamed after Lena's late mother, who once told her, "Kindness doesn't make you weak. It makes you unbreakable." The town's energy shifted. People walked taller. They spoke louder. They believed, again, in the power of one voice. Meanwhile, Harold Marshall, once the king of real estate, remained under house arrest, his health declining. Vivian withdrew from public life entirely, her social circle evaporated. Gerald and Marissa's marriage ended. They left Rosefield. And Ethan? He quietly reopened a small furniture repair shop in a neighboring town. He lived alone. He wrote letters, dozens of them, each one ending with a simple apology. Lena never responded. Some ghosts are best left unread. But she wished him peace. Because healing, she had learned, wasn't about watching others suffer. It was about no longer letting their damage live in you. Final scene. A future unfolding. One afternoon, as golden light spilled across her office desk, Lena looked up from her laptop. Sophie, now in her school uniform, stood in the doorway, clutching a rolled-up drawing. "I made something," she said, shyly. Lena unfolded the paper. It was a picture of them, hand in hand, standing in front of a house with big windows. Flowers blooming all around. Above it, written in careful, crooked letters, "Home is where you're loved." Lena's throat tightened. She reached across the desk, pulled Sophie into a hug, and whispered, "Yes, baby, that's exactly what it is." If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more real-life family dramas. Let me know in the comments what you think about today's story. Was it fair or totally messed up? See you in the next one.